There's the pass to Leitner. Puts it up. Yes!
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cameron Chronicles. I'm your host, Ranjan Jindal. I'm joined by my co-host, Caleb Dudley. Caleb, how are you this afternoon?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing great. We got a lot to get to today, but we have two very special guests. First time this season on the Cameron Chronicles, we have Andrew Long, who's the Chronicle sports editor, and Dom Fenoglio, who is one of our beats who covered the Wake Forest game that we'll talk about. Welcome to you both. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Of course. So just to start off, since we last recorded, Duke has won 3 straight games, defeated Boston College 80-65 at home, and then followed that up with a 77-69 win against Wake Forest, and then traveled down to Tallahassee and in the first game of a 3-game road trip took down the Seminoles 76-67. So we'll recap, all those 3 games and then preview the upcoming 2 road games, tough ones against Miami and Wake Forest, and then also kind of talk about the ACC standings, March Madness. The first 16 seeds were released by the NCAA Tournament Committee Sunday, so we'll talk about that as well. Just to start off, we'll talk about the Boston College game. Caleb, I'll start with you. Pretty solid win across the board for the Blue Devils. What stood out to you in that game for Duke?
Yeah, for me, it was really just an all-around team effort. I think they had all 5 starters scored in double digits, which obviously is a good thing to have every single game. Obviously, Boston College isn't like the greatest team on earth or anything, but for Duke to be able to show that they can spread the wealth, and Shire played more of the bench. Jalen Blakes, TJ Power both played, and Sean Stewart all played in that game, which kind of seemed to become a trend before this, somewhat maybe going forward. And for me, Mark Mitchell was great. He was 6 for 7 from the field, 7 rebounds, 2 for 2 from 3, which I don't think you said that about Mark Mitchell all year.
Nope.
Jared McCain had a double-double, which we'll talk about Jared McCain later, I'm sure. But yeah, for me, just, a really good job all around. The defense is what stood out to me as the most impressive. The job they did on Quentin Post, who's one of the best big men in the conference. Kind of an interesting strategy going to putting Mark Mitchell on him as the primary defender with Flip as the help guy on a guard, and then when they switched it off a screen, Filipowski would just step up and guard posts. They did a really good job. He was 2 for 5, I think lowest points he's had all year. So really good job all around against Boston College.
Yeah, definitely. And their guards can shoot it from deep pretty well. And I think it was a combination of they missed some shots, but also some great perimeter defense from Duke. They were only 5 for 26 from behind the arc, which really helped the Blue Devils' case there. But yeah, a solid win for Duke. I think it got close towards the end of the first half, but I think especially coming out of the gate, those first 4 or 5 minutes of the second half, you really saw the Blue Devils pull away there against Boston College. And then Duke went and faced a team that was hot. Wake Forest has been playing really well, especially at home. But Wake Forest comes to Durham and loses by 8. And again, a close game kind of in the first half and throughout the contest, but really, Duke finished strong. Dom, you were there covering for us. So what were some things that stood out in the Wake Forest game?
Yeah, I really think the biggest key to that game was getting their bigs in foul trouble. Before the matchup, I really thought Wake Forest might be a team that could give Duke problems because they start 2 guys who are around 7 feet tall. And as we know, interior defense has been an area of weakness for the Blue Devils. But almost immediately, both of their big guys got into foul trouble, and that allowed Duke to dictate the pace of the game and really establish themselves on the defensive end. Wake Forest, now they're the 3rd highest scoring team in the ACC, behind only Duke and North Carolina. But when they played, I think they were number 2 and right near number 1. And Duke held them to 69 points, 6 of 26 from 3-point range, 39% field goals overall. I thought it was a really impressive performance defensively from the Blue Devils. And again, Caleb mentioned Mark Mitchell in the Boston College game. I thought Mark Mitchell and Kyle Filipowski, that this was one of their better showings of the year as a front court duo. I think that it helped, again, that Wake Forest bigs got into foul trouble, but Mark Mitchell had 8 rebounds, Flip had 10, Mark had 23, and Kyle had 21. So that's a winning recipe for Duke. And I think that was a really, really bigger win than a lot of people realize, because I think Wake Forest is going to be a team that makes the tournament and threatens a lot of other teams in the ACC this year.
Yeah, I also, Caleb, correct me if I'm wrong because you got the stat pulled up, but did Duke lead wire to wire in it?
Yeah, it was tied at points, but Wake Forest never led.
Okay. That to me is a super significant thing. You touched on all the important bits, getting their bigs into foul trouble. Mitchell played one of his best games. I think that's a career high in points for him. That was the best game from Filipowski I've seen in a long time.
Yeah.
He's kind of like been in a slump, and he's like his volume scoring has definitely still been there. Uh, but anybody who's like watched the games can tell you that like he just seems a little off. Is it like his usual moves aren't necessarily working? He's not as good of a shooter as he typically is. But this one, I think he was 8 for 14 from the floor.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, which isn't like spectacular, but it's like it's what you need.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing is, he was 1 for 6 from 3-point range. And I think he had at least 2, maybe 3 or 4 shots that rimmed out. They were in and out and they were really good looks. And those are shots that fall for him more often than not. So that 21 points and 8 for 14, that's pretty good numbers, but it very well could have been 30 points.
Yeah. And I know like we'll talk more kind of about the rest of the guard room as we get into the Florida State game, especially Jared McCain. I think the one like sort of bleak spot in that game though was Tyrese Proctor. I feel like it's been a while since we've seen him really kind of like hit his full stride. And I know there's a bit of an asterisk with that Wake game because he hit the floor super hard and banged his head and didn't actually travel with the team to Tallahassee due to concussion protocol. And so who knows when he'll actually be back in the lineup, but 25 minutes, 0 for 5 from the floor. Not great. 4 rebounds, a couple assists, but also a turnover and a foul. Like in 25 minutes, just not the sort of efficiency or like playmaking capability that we've seen from him at other points. So I'm interested to see how that kind of manifests looking forward.
Yeah, 2 things to add on to that. I think going off the Proctor thing that Andrew just said, you saw Shire really played. They played technically, I guess, 10 guys, but 4 of them played 2 minutes or less. And Caleb Foster had to fill in for Tyrese Proctor. He was 0 for 4, 0 for 2 from 3. So I think you've kind of seen that if Duke goes down a guy, they're still not super confident in whoever they have on the bench. But the other thing, on a more positive note, to go with that game, being there and watching it was just the fight that Duke showed. There's times we've seen them kind of get punched in the mouth and not be able to respond, but in that game, you saw even Coach Shire get fired up, throw a ball back at a ref. You saw Cameron and the team kind of get juiced up behind that against a really good Wake Forest team. Hunter Salas was outstanding especially in the first half at Cameron, and would definitely be some intensity on Saturday when they play again.
Yeah, definitely. And I mentioned last game or about the Boston College game opposing 3-point percentage, and this game too, you held Wake to a pretty good percentage from deep, who's a great shooting team. You only held them to 6 of 26, like Dom was saying. But I actually looked back, and over the past 5 games, Duke is in the 100th percentile in opposing 3-pointers percentage. And that's super important because, I mean, the ACC specifically has some really good 3-point shooting teams. And just, I think ever since the North Carolina game, Coach Shire has been really focused on improving the defensive end and not letting teams beat you from deep because, that's going to be really important, especially because, like, as well as Duke can play offensively at times, if teams can, make it a shootout, that can negate the Cameron crazies, can negate things like that. And so if you lock up and play good defense on the 3-point line, that can really hinder teams' abilities to compete against Duke.
I will say I think that's one of the places where Tyrese Proctor's can be missed, especially is because he's probably Duke's best on-ball defender. I don't know, like I don't really feel like that plagued Duke all that much against Wake Forest or against Florida State, especially. But it's worth looking at going forward. I mean, they play Miami on Wednesday, and then they play Wake again, and then they've got NC State, and they've got Carolina. Like Louisville gave them some problems a little bit. Like not that Louisville's good, but like. But
Yeah.
if you give any team space,
Right.
like
Yeah.
I mean, we kid ourselves. Like all of these guys are college basketball players
Yeah.
for a reason, right? Like they're all good. They all know how to shoot. And so yeah, the 100th percentile thing, that's crazy. I'm interested to see how that develops though, without like its sort of main dude.
And I think going off that, which is a crazy number, Ranjan, you talked about, the threes being able to take the crowd out of the game or vice versa on road games, especially in March Madness. You see a lot of classic upsets or guys
Good
like
point.
Fletcher McGee hitting 10
Yeah.
threes for Wofford or,
Jimmer for that?
Vermont hitting 33s in a game. So for Duke, who's, inevitably going to probably be a top 16 team when March Madness comes around, it's for them to avoid a team that's a conference champion and shoots the lights out of the ball to be able to defend the ball at maybe the best the best in the country, like you're saying, will be huge for them in March.
Yeah, for sure. All right. 2 games down. So then Duke started its road trip going down to Tallahassee. Won by 9 against Florida State. Andrew, you mentioned Tyrese Proctor's injury. He did not travel with the team and was out. And Duke, it's hard to win in the ACC. It's even harder to win on the road, and it's even harder to win on the road without a starter. And so I just, for me, like it's important to emphasize that because I think Duke's been winning, and while it hasn't been, perfect in any of the games per se, like the ability for a team to win, you're gonna have to win ugly. You're gonna have to win on the road, and I think Duke has shown its ability to consistently put in these wins where it's going to be a 5 to 10 point margin. Those games are super important, and I think this was a perfect example of that. But also, you can't talk about this game without talking about Jared McCain. He was incredible in Proctor's absence, scoring 35, 8 of 11 from deep. The thing that impressed me the most about Jared, I think, is we've seen him score in catch and shoot situations, in attacking closeouts, but we haven't really seen him score as the primary guy on like a pick and roll situation from the top of the key. As a primary, he wasn't the primary ball handler, but like sets were ran where he, handled the ball. That was different, and he showed his ability to score as the number one guy. Um, and that was super impressive for me, and it never felt like he was forcing anything, because especially when you're making everything, it can feel like you just want to shoot every time you touch the ball and take bad shots, because at the end of the day Duke had to win the game, and it got kind of close in the second half, but there was never a point where he took ridiculously bad shots. So his just scoring ability and his calmness really impressed me throughout, so that was great from Jared.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we'll talk more about Jared, but before we do, I just also want to highlight the performance of Jeremy Roach because I think his performance was pretty understated. He came up with some really big shots for Duke. You mentioned that game was close. It was close throughout. Duke never really built a double-digit lead for a substantial period of time. It seems like every time they tried to pull away, Florida State came up with some big stops, some big buckets, and it was Jeremy Roach who was there oftentimes to answer things with a big three-pointer or a big play. And I think that, you mentioned that McCain had a lot of those primary ball handler moments. I still think he's the most effective off the ball,
Mm-hmm.
Just getting in those transition threes, those catch and shoots, those drives to the baskets, especially on the offensive glass. I think Jeremy Roach is the guy you want with the ball in crunch time.
Uh, Also, like on that sort of point, um, we have a group chat with all of our men's basketball beats where we'll kind of like send in stats and everything. And somebody pointed out that Duke is 9-0 when Caleb Foster starts in place of Tyrese Proctor. Am I right about that? I think.
I think
Yes.
which lineup.
No, like I know you have gripes about it, but it's kind of an interesting it's an interesting thought experiment, right?
Yeah.
Because you look at Caleb Foster's numbers and it's not like they're crazy. And so it's like what about him being there instead of Proctor being there? I know Dom, I know your argument is sort of like the standard of games is a little higher that Proctor
Yeah,
starts
yeah.
generally, but I also I don't know if that's entirely it. So I think it's something worth discussing. Like, what is the difference when there's Foster there versus Proctor there? Because clearly it's something. I'm just not sure what.
I wonder, I mean, maybe it's when Proctor's not scoring and he's taking a higher volume of shots than you're missing, because Caleb's not going to take a bunch of shots regardless, and he's going to, make a decent amount. He has pretty good percentages, even though he's not as high of a volume of a shooter. So I guess when Tyrese is cold, that could play a part of it. But I also think, yeah, I agree. Like, I don't think Duke beats Clemson without Proctor. Maybe not even Georgia Tech at home. But, like, it's interesting because outside of the Baylor game, there were a lot of, winnable games. But it's an interesting stat.
I will say, going there, you said he doesn't take a lot of shots, but looking at KenPom here, he's 10th during ACC play in 3-point percentage.
Yeah,
So
his percentage is good.
So when he takes smart shots, and when he does put them up, they usually have a good chance of falling. So definitely can see an argument why he's a very valuable piece to the team.
And that's Foster, not Proctor.
That's Foster, yes.
Oh
Yeah,
wow.
that's true.
Okay.
My thing with the stat is this. I mean, first of all, Duke's lost 5 games all year. I think the only loss that really, really you can say was a bad loss was that Georgia Tech loss.
Arkansas
Arkansas in
is
retrospect,
not a good team.
I think in the moment it wasn't a terrible loss. I don't think anybody thought when we lost Arkansas that's terrible. And that Georgia Tech loss came without 38 minutes of Tyrese Proctor. That's going to go down as, a loss when he started because he got hurt in the first 2 minutes. But that loss was, in my opinion, because they didn't have Proctor. And you mentioned it, those 9 games he hasn't started in is Baylor. That's a great team win. And then Hofstra, Charlotte, some of these non-conference opponents, and then I think the Notre Dame game, the Syracuse game, some of these lower table ACC games. And I mean, I do truly think that Tyrese Proctor is an integral piece of this team. I think he deserves to be the starting point guard as good as Caleb Foster has been. I do understand that his efficiency has been down this year, but from my perspective, that comes more from trying to play through this ankle recovery and, not entirely getting into the swing of things and continuously kind of going in and out of the lineup. So I think his role has kind of been muddled this year.
Yeah. Also, not to mention that 2 of the games that Proctor didn't start were 2 Jared McCain legacies,
Yeah.
right? It's like tying Zion Williamson's freshman points record in a game with 35 at Florida State is crazy, and then also like exceeding 20 points at MSG to beat then top 10 Baylor, who's looking good
Mhm.
Oh,
now.
yeah.
Like Baylor is a legit team. Like almost took down Kansas in Allen Fieldhouse. So
Also, like long term, obviously you don't want a player to get injured, but the fact that Caleb is doing much better with his on the ball handling, especially against a team so athletic and long as Florida State, and then Jared's playing as confidently as he can. When these 4 guards are all healthy and meshing, like knock on wood, hopefully in March, that's going to be really important for Duke in terms of rotating guards out, because I'm a big believer in elite backcourts win in March, and that's I think what Duke has. And if it's a healthy backcourt, it's going to be really dangerous. So we'll see how long Proctor is out for. I think the update this morning, Shire said he hoped that Proctor would at least participate in the non-contact part of practice today, which is Monday. But we'll see about an update for Miami. But definitely wish him quick recovery for Proctor. All right, now let's move on to a kind of discussion about the ACC and March Madness and stuff as a whole. I talked about the 16 seeds release. We'll talk about that in a second. But first, we'll do our stock up, stock down. Caleb, I know you have two. Start off with you.
Yeah, stock up is Pitt. You maybe thought after they got walloped by Duke at home a long time ago now, I guess, that their season was kind of done. But since then, they've won. I guess that's been 7 out of the last 9, and they've won 5 in a row. Blake Hinson, as Duke fans, I'm sure are aware,
Me and Dom know for sure.
Oh, man.
is spectacular. He had 27 this week to break Virginia's 23-game home win streak. They won 74-63. He had 41 against Louisville in their most recent game, the same day as Jared's 35. So no one's helped themselves more than Pitt, really, in the last few weeks, I think, in the country. And Bart Torvik has them at a 28% chance to make the tournament now, which a couple weeks ago they were probably definitely less than 10%, maybe like 5%. So definitely stock up there. Great credit to Jeff Capel, who's done a great job this year with them. Stock down is on the other end of that is Miami. They've lost 4 games in a row, um, including 2 absolute drubbings. Virginia beat them 60-38 in a game that was just crazy to watch, and then they lost to UNC. And then Clemson had a close game with Clemson, and then Clemson all of a sudden just came out of nowhere and blew them out, which was a little odd. And then they lost to Boston College in Boston this week. So Miami's season, pretty much, unless they get hot and do some kind of magic in the AC tournament, I think their season's pretty much done in terms of making the tournament. So they have a couple big chances left. Obviously, Duke and UNC again, but Miami definitely stocked down.
that's crazy. Like at the start of the year too. I mean, they were inside the top 10 at
Yeah.
points. Like Norchad Omier is still being great. They like brought Nigel Pack back.
Yeah.
Like that team should not be as bad as it is.
No, it's
I think it starts on the defensive end for them, frankly, because they're going to score, but it's also a team that kind of lives and dies
Lives
by
and
the
dies,
3. And so,
definitely.
like, if they're making threes, they can beat anyone in the league. But if they're not, something like that can happen, like they did against Virginia.
Your reminder that Duke goes to Miami on Wednesday. So if they live
Yes.
by the 3, then
Remember that. And remember Duke's opposing 3-point percentage that we talked about. So that'll be important. Also, just quickly on Pittsburgh, I know you mentioned Blake Hinson, but I think what's really helping Pittsburgh is their freshman backcourt has been gelling together of Carlton Carrington and Jalen Lowe. Jalen hit a great 3 against Duke at like in the last minute, I remember.
that.
But I think them two really getting into their own, they're super talented, but just playing together and scoring well and gelling. This is a dangerous team that can score and that's well coached. So yeah, watch out for Pitt. Dom, I know you got a stock down over here.
Yeah, I mean, I had to bring up North Carolina. I mean, really, obviously they played great against Duke, but besides that, recently North Carolina has not looked like the top 5 team they have been for the rest of the season. They've picked up some pretty bad losses recently against Syracuse, against Georgia Tech right before Duke. They lost at home to Clemson right after Duke. They beat Virginia Tech. They beat Miami, but both of those games really could have gone the other way. And looking at the stats here, the biggest difference has been their defensive rating. North Carolina was really talked about as a great defensive team for much of the year. I think we saw that when Duke went into Chapel Hill and tried to play there. I think they were really impressive on the defensive end. But in their last 5 games, They're giving up 114 points per 100 possession and almost nearly 81 points per game. Both of those are in the bottom 10% of the country. And I think part of that is because opponents were shooting really poorly from three to start the year, and we're kind of seeing almost a regression to the mean. We're seeing some more shots falling. But the bigger thing that I'm noticing here is North Carolina's not forcing any turnovers. They only forced 8.6 turnovers per game. That's in the first percentile nationally in the last 5 games. And, we see it on Duke's end. They're at their best when they don't turn the ball over. That's been one of their strengths this year on the offensive end. But on the flip side of things, if you're not forcing any turnovers, you're going to get less of those easy buckets in transition where Carolina really excels. So I don't think their season is lost by any means. They're still most likely going to be a top 4 seed. They very well could be a 2 seed. I think that's where they are right now. But I think they still have a lot of questions that they didn't have 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, for sure. They got the test that starts, this weekend at Virginia. Always a tough place to play in a different brand of basketball. So we'll see right there. I don't really have a traditional stock up, stock down, but I just wanted to talk about the race for fourth in the ACC, which is going to be super, super interesting and tight because the top 4 seeds, as you may or may not know, get the double bye in the ACC tournament. And so that's super important in terms of, getting that extra day of rest and having to play only 3 instead of 4 to possibly win a conference title. But right now, you mentioned Pittsburgh. So Pittsburgh, Wake Forest, and NC State are all at 8-6. NC State got a huge win at Clemson by one Saturday night that bumped them up to 8-6. And then Clemson and Florida State are 7-7. And then, on the outside looking in, you got Syracuse at 7-8 and BC and VT at 6-8. But that's going to be super interesting. I think the schedules are interesting to look at. I think Clemson has a pretty favorable schedule the rest of their way. Wake Forest is a little bit more difficult. You got Duke, Virginia Tech, and Clemson having to play Wake. But it'll be interesting to see who gets that last spot because I think for tournament resume reasons, this league has shown that it's going to be pretty competitive and pretty deep down to the end. So that'll be cool to watch for sure. In talking about the tournament, the March Madness tournament, the top 16 seeds were announced Sunday, and Duke was the final 3 seed in the bracket in the what region? West region. And North Carolina was the only other team in there from the league. But just generally, I guess we can kind of talk about, there's been this narrative that the ACC is a little bit on a down year, I guess, past couple of years. What are your all's takes on that? How do you see the ACC? Maybe how many teams do you think the ACC will get? How do you think the ACC will perform in March? Open it up for discussion.
Yeah, I think I can start. And to me, it just seems crazy that a conference that had 3 Elite 8 teams and 2 Final Four teams 2 years ago, and then another Final Four team last year in Miami, continues to get disrespected in bracketology and just national discourse. I get that ACC might not have, the star power or the top to bottom great teams that other conferences do. But players wise, they still have Kyle Filipowski, PJ Hall, RJ Davis, Armando Bacot, guys who have proven to be the best players in the country time and time again. And I think looking at it right now, you have 4 teams I think that are pretty much locks to get in. That's North Carolina, Duke, Clemson, and Virginia. Wake, if we just talked about Wake, if they can win maybe 2 of those games we just mentioned, I feel like they're definitely in too. And I foresee them being a tough out in the ACC tournament just with how talented they are, especially Hunter Salas. And then we just talked about Pitt. Pitt's got a chance to play themselves in. They have a 28% chance right now, according to Bart Torvik, but we talked about how much that's gone up recently. It can keep climbing if they keep playing well. And for me, I think you have teams that can also perform in March. Duke is pretty well rounded. They guard the 3 really well. Clemson has one of the best big men in the country. North Carolina has maybe the best guard in the country in RJ Davis and Armando Bacot, who's been there a million times in the tournament. Virginia has maybe the best defense in the country. So just to me, I think the ACC is doing just fine. They have 6 teams in the top 50 of the net, and I think they'll be just fine come March too.
I also think it's kind of funny to say that the ACC is in a down year when it's it's not like a whole lot of other conferences are punching really, really above their weight either. Like the Pac-12 is bad. The Pac-12 is bad. They got one good team. And to their credit, Arizona's a really good team. A really, really good team. You talk about guards taking you far in March. Their guards are awesome.
Yeah, they are.
Duke learned that firsthand. I was at that game. They cooked them. But at the same time, like you look at the SEC, and I know Dom and Ranjan, we've talked about this. Like I don't know how well SEC basketball translates to March. Kentucky does not know how to play defense. South Carolina has proven to be a little wishy-washy. I like Tennessee a lot. I think that brand works well. Very like guard heavy, bringing back a lot of good scorers, and they'll just beat you up. Like I think that sort of brand of basketball can take you far. But like, but I mean, outside of that, like I don't feel that. The Big 12 is great. Like we know this. The
Yeah.
Big 10 is sort of whatever. Like I think who's their
The
top
Big Ten has
right
one
now?
team. It's pretty.
Well,
Yeah.
Illinois, I
The
guess.
thing about the Big Ten, the big knock on the Big Ten the past couple of years has always been that they look really good until you get to March, and they have never had very much success in the tournament. And I do think that there's, you mentioned the other conferences, and Ranjan mentioned earlier about what wins in March. And I do think that there is kind of a noticeable difference between conference play. The SEC is very athletic, very physical. It's a very fast flowing game. And I think a lot of times that's the type of game that can go one way or the other really quickly. And that's why they struggle in March, because they go cold one game and it's tougher for them to win. I think one of the strengths of the ACC in March is that their guards don't turn the ball over very much. You have a lot of really capable guards. You have RJ Davis, very experienced. You have Jeremy Roach, very experienced. Norchad Omier and Nigel Pack and all those Miami guys, they can all handle the ball. That's why they've had so much success the past couple of years in March. Obviously, they're not doing well this year, but Caleb mentioned they made the Final Four last year. I just think that the ACC shows every year that they have a winning formula, and when UNC, Virginia, Duke loses to a lower tier ACC team, people really react poorly because they say, what a terrible loss. But then, you have Kansas dropping all these games in the Big 12. And yes, the quality of some of these Big 12 teams is very good, but at the same time, these ACC teams are very good. It's tough for me to really say that all of these other conferences are better than the ACC when we don't have any way of measuring that until March Madness. And in March Madness, the ACC performs very well.
Yeah, going back to that, looking at top 50 by conference, in terms of net, SEC has 7, and Andrew didn't mention Alabama or Auburn. I think
Oh,
they're both
yeah,
great.
I
But
forgot that.
um,
But I mean, either way, like
yeah.
like Bama kind of literally shot themselves in the foot
Yeah.
last year.
Yeah.
But SEC has 7, ACC has 6, Big 10 has 5, Big East has 4, which obviously they're led by UConn, who is probably the best team in the country, but they have 4. The Big 12 has 10. They're obviously the one that stands out as
Yeah.
being great. But then the ACC is right there with the rest of them. They have more than most of the other power conferences. So I think it's really hard to tell, and I think the ACC definitely gets a bad rap because they have Louisville and Notre Dame,
Yeah.
teams that are just simply no good. But I think going forward, there's definitely the top of the ACC can definitely play with anybody, and come March.
I just want to harp on this SEC ACC comparison, because right now, in Joe Lunardi's latest bracketology, there's going to be one new Tuesday morning. So I'm sorry if I'm not totally updated. This is from Friday, but the SEC has 9 teams in, and the ACC has 4. Now, there's an ACC SEC challenge earlier this year, and the teams tied 7-7 across the board. Clemson has beaten both Alabama and South Carolina. You mentioned Georgia Tech. They beat Mississippi State, who is currently a projected tournament team. And you see that the ACC can compete with the SEC. And I don't think there should be that much of a discrepancy between the SEC and ACC in terms of projected, teams in. And I think what's made the ACC really, its case improved these past month. I talked about it earlier, but just the middle of the league, I think, is a lot better than it was last year. And I think is playing a lot better these past couple of weeks. I mean, right now, that middle of the pack that I just mentioned, like Clemson's probably a lock, but Clemson's a little bit of an anomaly just because of the non-conference strength of schedule. But Pitt and Wake are both, like, I think, tournament teams in my eyes. They can play in the tournament. They
100%.
play in March. And even you got a team like, NC State, like, you don't know. They can play, they have players that can score 30 in every given night. DJ Horn, went off against Clemson, and they are a dangerous team as well. And so I think there's a strength in the middle of the league that I think wasn't maybe there previously that might result in some teams beating up on each other, but I don't think that means the league is weak. I actually think it means the league is stronger. So we'll see what happens in March, but I don't know.
Yeah, going to
That's
that,
my
I'm
pick.
assuming Lenardi. I haven't looked at it, but I'm assuming Wake's not in,
Yeah, so I think Wake is like a first 4 out
And-
in the recent one.
and Florida, I'm assuming, is one of the SEC teams that's in. If I had to guess,
Yes.
Florida made the
And
AP.
Wake Forest also beat Florida
Right.
earlier this year and is ranked higher than them
Yeah,
in
so-
Ken Palm. So, just going to your point, yeah, I think definitely, hopefully, it'll even itself out towards the end of the year.
I also think like we look at these kind of mid-major conferences, like especially Big East
The Mountain
and
West.
the Mountain West. Look, I am from the Mountain West. Like I've grown up watching Mountain West
Really?
basketball. Okay. But like I mean we saw like Clemson cooked Boise State, and Boise State is like one of the better teams in the Mountain West, projected I think as an 8, like on the 8 or 9 line right now, if I'm not mistaken.
Mhm.
And it's like, look, I mean, San Diego State got to the national title game last year, but like, let's be real for a second. Most of the big dogs got knocked out really early,
Yeah.
and like San Diego State took it to Alabama. Like Alabama was a really good team, but still, it's like I don't know. I'm not convinced. UConn has the formula. Like Marquette has really good guards. I worry about Marquette's size a lot. I don't think that'll take
Yeah.
them very far.
Marquette just got also just got hammered by UConn.
Yeah.
in an absolute drubbing.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean,
Like I think like
and Purdue just lost to who they lose to? Somebody not good.
Ohio
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 State,
State.
who just fired their coach.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but it's like I mean, strength is always relative, right? So I think
Definitely.
it's very easy to say the ACC is down and just leave the sentence there. But you're like, okay, so the ACC is down for being the undisputed best conference in college basketball over the last 20 to 30 years. All right, it's number 2 or 3 now.
Yeah.
I don't think that's that big of a deal. And I also think it's hard to say that a conference is down when it's still by many metrics quite elite.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say is this. I mean, we've seen a lot more this year than I think a lot of previous years. Crazy upsets day after day, week after week. There isn't a team all year. I mean, you can put UConn up there, but even UConn has dropped a couple of games that they probably shouldn't have. Everybody's losing these games to teams that just aren't nearly at the same level as them, or quote unquote aren't at the same level as them. I think part of that's NIL, part of that's just conference realignment. All of the game is changing. Teams are getting better overall. So I think it's really tough to say that one conference is better than the other. I think the entire level of the average basketball team is getting a lot better.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, that was a fun discussion, guys. I appreciate that. We love, February, March basketball. It's that great time to talk about. Just quickly, before we wrap up, we'll just talk about these next couple of games for Duke on this road trip, going to Miami and going to Wake. In order for Duke to finish this road trip undefeated, what do you guys think are some of the keys for the Blue Devils to win these next 2?
Yeah, I think for me, it boils down to we talked about earlier. Tyrese Proctor is probably their best on-ball defender, and you're coming up against 2 teams that can shoot the lights out of the ball on the road. We talked. Ron just mentioned earlier how the threes can get the crowd into it easy, and if Nigel Pax comes out on fire, Duke's gonna have a long night. And then going on Saturday, if Hunter Salas or Damari Monsanto get going, it might get ugly fast.
Those are hoopers.
And so, for me, I mean, Duke's had a great 3-point defense, but it only takes one game where a team just cannot miss. We saw that like Pitt against Virginia this week. Pitt just could not miss. And so for Duke, if they don't have Tyrese Proctor, it's going to be tough to defend the 3 for sure.
Yeah. For me, it's flip. I think in both games, he's going to be really important, but in very different ways. I think against Miami, he's going to have a big size advantage. Miami likes to play small, and I think it's going to be important for Flip, not just to get inside, but to look for contact and drawing fouls inside. I think one of the biggest criticisms of his game this year has been kind of shying away from contact inside and trying to avoid contact instead of drawing a foul. And I think if he can get Miami into foul trouble, I think Duke can win that game comfortably. If he can't and he gets inside his own head, they could lose. And then Wake Forest, kind of on the flip side of things, he's going to be going toe to toe against 2 7-footers, and I highly doubt that they'll both get into foul trouble again. So that's going to be him needing to really hold his own on the defensive end. And I mean, we've seen him do it before. We've seen him not do it before. I think that's going to be a big game for Flip.
I think the biggest thing for me, you guys pretty much touched on it all, but like it's very hard for Lightning to strike the same place twice. And so I think, you see Jared McCain drop 35 points in Florida State and you think, oh, like this is like he's just going to keep doing that. And the answer is that he can't, right? Nobody can. There's a reason that the single game record is a single game record. And when you're playing against other really talented guards, when you're playing on the road, like that's going to be hard. And now you're going to be everybody's like number one threat. 'Cause they're like, oh, the kid can shoot, so we're just going to we're going to guard him. So for me, it's Caleb used the word like spread the wealth earlier, and I think in terms of scoring, that's going to be incredibly necessary over these next couple games, especially with Proctor out. I mean, we've seen a few games where he can just kind of take over. So points from and then like some bench points, I think are going to be really important in both of those games.
Ryan Young.
Yeah, maybe Ryan Young. Yeah, for sure. I think was it the first Wake Forest game? There was only 4 bench points. Yeah. So that'll be important. Also, just a quick nugget. I don't think Wake Forest has lost at home yet, so
That's true.
that'll be super interesting. But yeah, you guys covered it all. I think going to be two tough games, but two great contests either way. Excited for it. Dom, you're going to Miami. I know that'll be a fun
yeah.
time. He's going to
Very
get time
excited.
there. Check out all our coverage at dukechronicle.com. We'll have everything from previews and stuff from these next 2 games shortly. And yeah, just a great week of college basketball. Getting closer to March. Thank you guys for listening. We'll see you guys after the Louisville game and preview a home contest against Virginia, which will be big for the Blue Devils. For Caleb Dudley, I'm Ranjan Jindal. This has been the Cameron Chronicles.